Hello, guys. Let's talk about some restrictions that you can have on your input elements. Okay, so we've been talking about how to create an input in HTML, but there are certain attributes that you can use in order to bring more restrictions to your HTML input fields. So the first restriction that we can talk about, that's going to be the one used with the checked attribute. Let's say, for example, this one is used with radio buttons. Let's say, for example, you want to specify that an input field should always be pre-selected when the page loads. That's an example here. We have, we would say Paris, for example, as the label. And then let's close the label here. So this is the radio button. If we write checked here, you will see that by default, this particular radio button is going to be pre-selected whenever the page loads. Okay, let me add another radio button here just so that you will see what I mean by that. So maybe here I'll say London. So if I remove checked here, so only the first radio button is going to be pre-selected. If I remove checked there, no radio button is going to be selected, but if I write checked here, the second one is going to be pre-selected whenever the page loads. So that's basically how to use that. Okay, so this checked here will work with the radio button, but it will also work with the checkbox input. Like for example here, if I say checkbox as well, now you can see the second checkbox is going to be pre-selected. All right, if I remove checked here and write it up here, the second checkbox is going to be pre-selected. So that's basically a restriction that you can bring depending on the requirements. Another restriction we can talk about is going to be the disabled attribute. Okay, so the disabled attribute is going to help you specify that an input field should be disabled. Let's say, for example, you want your checkbox to be disabled. You will simply come and write disabled here. So if you write disabled here, you will see that the first checkbox is going to be disabled, so you can't click on that, you can't do anything on that, but it will still display on the web page. As for the second checkbox, you can still click on it because you didn't write disabled here. But if you did write disabled here, you will see that it's going to get disabled as well. Okay, so this is going to work for checkboxes. It can also work for other text fields. Let's say, for example, if we say that we want a text field here, text, and this one is a password field, for example, and if you write, let me put the label up here. Yes. Let me say name, for example, password, a break line, like this. All right, so now if we say disabled here for the text, will be disabled. You will see that this text field is going to be disabled. I can't write anything inside. If I say password disabled as well, see the password field will also get disabled. So this particular restriction will work on almost all the input types. The third one is going to be the max attribute to determine or to specify the maximum value for an input. So this is usually used for when you are working with number input. For example, if this is a number input type, let me remove this. Okay, let me break line again here. So if this is a number, let's say quantity, for example, like this. Okay, so if this is number, and then you can specify the maximum value here. Let's say, for example, 10. Okay, so this is going to be the maximum. So when you increase here, when you reach 10, you can go beyond 10. If you do not specify, it's still go up to, 100 and 1,000 and all of that. Okay, so you can still use the max here to add some restriction. So if you say 10, it will not go beyond 10. And another restriction would be to say that the minimum value that you want to apply here would be the value, let's say 5, for example. So if you say 5 like this, you won't be able to go beyond that. That's basically how you can work with that. So this is going to work for the number input type, but it will also work with the date input type. For example, you can set the maximum date, the minimum date, and all of that. Okay, I made a video in which I talked to you about, a video on the different types of input element. So that's basically what we can talk about this restriction. Another restriction would be to talk about maybe the length, the max length. Okay, so let's say that here we are using a text field. So type text. And then we want to restrict the maximum length. So we say maximum length. If we say 5 here, this is going to specify that the maximum number of characters for an input field must be 5 characters. So when I come here, if I write 5 characters, that will be it. I can't write 6 characters because we said the maximum length is 5 characters here. If I say 10, the maximum length will be 10. Okay, if I come here and write my characters here, as soon as I reach 10 characters, it will stop there. So that's the use of this max length attribute to add this restriction. Another thing that we can talk about is going to be the pattern attribute. So this pattern attribute will work with, especially with telephone number field. So you say input tel like this, and then determine the pattern. So the pattern here is going to help you specify a regular expression to check the input value against. So for example, for phone numbers, you can say that you want numbers only, and then you can specify your regular expression. So you want numbers from 0 to 9, and you want 3 number here separated by an hyphen, and after you would want again numbers from 0 to 9, and you would want 2 numbers, for example. Okay, and that will be that. So here this is going to be the pattern that needs to be respected. If it is not respected, you get an error message showing as a tooltip here. So here I'm not respecting the pattern. There I have a tooltip telling me that I need to respect the format. So as soon as I'm going to respect the telephone number format, when I put my cursor here, I will not get that error anymore. But if I do not respect it, you see, I will get an error. So that's a restriction that you can bring. And so this will particularly work with, the input type tel here for telephone number. If you want your user to input telephone number, telephone information in a particular field. Another thing that we can have a look at is going to be the read-only attribute. So the read-only attribute is going to specify that an input field is read-only. It cannot be modified, we cannot change it, but we can only read it. So if you say read-only like this, when you come on this particular field, you can't write anything. You can click it, but when you start typing, nothing is going to take, okay? Because this is a read-only input. So it can work for almost all the input types. Another one will be the required. So let me remove read only here and say required. So required, when you say required here, that means that you want to specify that this particular input field is required and must be filled. So it must be filled. So like here, if I don't write anything, when I put my cursor on the field, you can see a message, an error message telling me to write the phone number. Okay, to write, to fill out this field. And if I type anything, I can see that. So let's say, for example, we have a text field here. This is just some text. Let me remove the pattern restriction here, and we say that this particular text field is required. All right, so if I don't write anything, I have that error message. If I remove that, I have the error message telling me that I need to fill out this field. But as soon as I write anything inside, I will not get that error message anymore. So that's how you can play around the required restriction. We can also talk about the size attribute. So the size attribute would allow you to actually specify the width of your input field. Like if we say size, let me come here and say size equal to, and inside I will say 40. So when I say 40, you can see the width of my input field is going to increase. All right, if I say 30, it's going to reduce that. All right, if I say 20 and all of that. So the size attribute here is actually going to specify the width in terms of characters of your input field. And then we also have the step attribute. So the step attribute here is usually for input types like number. Let's say, for example, if you have number here, we can say that when you say number, you have this particular input where you can specify your number. Okay, but with the step attribute, it's going to specify the legal number intervals for your input field. So here by default, the interval is 1. Okay, so when you click here, it will go from 9 to 10, from 10 to 11. The interval is 1. What if you want the interval of between the numbers here, between the sequence of number to be 5, for example? So you will need to use the step attribute and say step equal to 5, for example. So if you do that, when you say like this 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and all of that. So because you specified the step to be 5 here. If you say 10, for example, it's going to be just that. So it will go from 10, 20, 30, and the interval between the numbers here would be 10. And then the last one would be value. So value, the attribute value here is going to be used, for example, if you want to specify the default value for an input. For example, for your submit button, for, but here, for example, in the number input type, if you say value 50 here, so 50 is going to be the default value. You see, so by default, when the page loads, 50 will appear as default value, on the screen. And as I said, you can use that with the buttons and all of that. So guys, these are some of the restrictions that I wanted to talk to you about, and that you can keep in mind when developing or creating your website or your web pages. If you have a form and you want to bring on some restrictions and some controls and all of that, these are some of the attributes that you can use. So I hope it was informative and clear. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the comment section, and I'm going to be more than willing to answer you. So don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this YouTube channel for more videos like this one. Let's meet in the next one.